As I'm going through this presentation, you should have the Elements and Principles of Art note-taking worksheet downloaded and open and be filling that out as I go through each element, defining what the element is, and then explaining how you could use this in photography to make for better photographs. When you're done with this presentation, done with your note-taking worksheet, please save it as a PDF and upload it into Canvas so I can make sure you have a good understanding of the elements and principles for this week. So let's begin. One, let's define what an element is. So I like to call these the building blocks of visual art, and also I like to reference them as learning your ABCs, because you have to learn your letters before you can combine your letters to make a word. Elements are the exact same thing. You learn what the elements are, and then you combine those in a certain way to follow a principle of art. So our first element is one that is really, really important, and that is line. And we've already talked about line a little bit, leading lines, which line, what it is just a mark made, and it takes you from one point to another. It's a moving point, a moving dot of some sorts. And generally it has greater length than it does width. And this can direct the eye in any type of format of horizontal, side to side, or vertical, up and down. Could be diagonal, it could be curvy, it could be zigzaggy, it could be many of things. Now, all of those examples are obvious lines that we see. Okay, this is a diagonal, this is a horizontal. But we also see things that are implied as a line as well. Like we see a dotted line as a line, or a dashed line as a whole entire line piece. Where the example down here of the train tracks and the telephone poles, we see the tops of the telephone poles as a line going back, a diagonal line, but it is not a solid, obvious line. Whereas the rest of our examples, you can definitely see the lines in the works. Now, this is a great way if you're trying to take your viewer's eye from a certain point to another point, if you want them to have a clear path to travel from, no question of what to look at in your image. Finding a line is a great way to make sure they find your focus point. So color is our next element of art, and color is also known as hue, and I may be using that interchangeably. So color, you have to have light to see color. If you walk into a dark room, you only see black, you don't see color. And light can affect how we perceive and see color as well. Like if I was in a black light or a purple light, my viewing of my desk and my room right here would seem more purpley, it would seem a lot cooler. Now there's certain color schemes as well that you can use to create a really nice harmonious photograph, or if you want to create a certain feeling in your photograph as well, using color controllably can create that sense. So there's certain color schemes that you're probably familiar with, the first one being primary colors, and our first example is the Rubik's Cube down here of blue, red, and yellow. Create a really nice whole scheme as well. They're perfectly positioned away from each other on the color wheel. And those primary colors you have to find out in nature. You can't mix those together to create any of the primary colors. Then there's secondary colors, and you take two primary colors to make a secondary color. And those secondary colors are purple, orange, and green. And then there's also intermediate or tertiary colors, as they're called. Those are your blue greens, your blue violets, your red orange, your red violet. Those examples of all the other colors in between, and you can pick out certain colors in the color wheel to create a really nice harmonious photograph. Now there's also certain color combinations that have those feelings. Like if you're trying to get a really cool, kind of calm photograph, using blues, purples and greens in your images can create that feeling, that sense of cool calmness in your photograph. Or if you really want to make like a warm, inviting photograph, you would want to find reds, oranges, and yellows to create that sense of inviting and warm. That you can control the feeling, what your viewer may feel when they see your photograph. Our next element of art is shape, which shape is a contained 2D area. Now there's two types of shapes. There's geometrical, which are like your math shapes. We recognize them as squares, triangles, circles. Generally, they're man-made shapes. They're perfect. The other types of shapes are organic, which are like leaves, humans, the outline of a puddle or an amoeba shape. Anything that doesn't fit into those perfect math man-made shapes are all organic. So our examples down here, this first one definitely more geometrical. We see triangles, squares, circles in this photograph. The middle one would probably fit more into a geometrical with the triangles, the man-made work in there. But our last example is a perfect one of a organic one, the flamingos coming together, because they're not perfect. This one on the right is a little bit hairier, a little bit more fluffy than the one on the left. But if you're really trying to simplify your photo down as well, because shape doesn't have depth, it's flat, that you can create a shallow depth of field. You can create a little bit more of a simplistic type of photograph with just using shape. And simple is good sometimes. We like simple. It's really nice and pleasing to look at. But if I go back, if you look at these images though, we don't see the details, the 3D-ness of any of these shapes. That's another element of art that we're going to get to in a bit. So our next element is space, and we've talked about this as well a little bit when we talked about using your grounds. But there's space, there's different types of space. So you can use the feeling of the grounds to create a really long depth of field going on, like our top photograph where it's going on forever. Or you can create a shallow depth of field. And understanding positive and negative space can help with this idea of the depth of field. Where positive space in our bottom photograph, our bottom example, the canoes would be the positive space, the subject, the objects that are taking up that area. Whereas the negative space would be all the black around it, that in between, it's just around our main focus. So if you want to create this really shallow or long depth of field, understanding positive and negative and playing with that can help create either the long or shallow. The next element of art is texture, which texture touches into another one of our senses, which is feeling. So how you look at something gives you a sense of how it would feel. And this adds a lot of interest, lots of fun little zest into a photograph as well, where zooming in and really seeing the complications of a texture can really be interesting and fun to look at. Like this kind of like lizard skin, and then our rope over here, the shattered glass. Even though it's zoomed in and it's a simple thing, it's really complicated when you start really observing it, which can be really interesting to look at and make you more appreciative of whatever it may be. Our next element of art is value, which that is black, white, and grays, of all the grays in between those black and white. And dark to light or light to dark. It's only in black and white. And this can add drama if you're looking for a really interesting feeling to your photograph, or also give you a sense of like timelessness, because for a long time we only had black and white photographs. But what we need to do as well is train our eye to see color as values. So some of the darkest colors are purples, blues, and some greens, where our lightest colors would be yellows, oranges, and sometimes like yellow green or things like that. And when we can get a sense of the lights and darks before we take the photograph and before we change it into black and white, can help with this drama or timelessness that we are going after. Our last element of art is form, which form is very similar to shape, but form is 3D. Same thing as shape is, it can be geometrical, those math shapes, those man-made shapes, cubes, spheres, cones, cylinders, or they can be organic, like a mountain, a tree, a stick, a rock, or a flower. And this helps create space and substance as well, where our example of the flower down here is an organic, and then we start getting to a bit more of the man-made geometrical as we start getting to the right. So the principles, what the principles are, I like to compare them like you learned your ABCs of your elements. So once you learn your ABCs, you combine your letters to make a word. And all of the elements come together to create a certain feeling and a view for all the elements. So let's dive in because that can be a little confusing. So our first principle of design is emphasis. And what emphasis does is you take some sort of variety to bring in a focus point. In all of these photographs, there's no question what the emphasis, the focal point is on all of these. And that can be done by switching up the elements. Like this is a leaf compared to a human eye, or all these dark black berries compared to the red raspberry, or this organic shape coming through this man-made landscape as well, or the circle shape compared against the lines. So having those elements contrasting, which I'll get to in a little bit too, these will kind of interchange and be used as well, can draw a certain focus point to a certain area. So rhythm and movement go together, which movement is showing action, but it also directs your eye to a certain area in the picture plane. Rhythm is a type of movement, but generally it's shown by shapes, colors, lines, the elements, and they have little varieties in them to give you this sense of rhythm. So think of rhythm as like your heartbeat. So the first two photographs are more towards the rhythm side, where we have the repeated little streams of water, but you can, if you were to rub your hand over it, it would kind of different. Or these colored pencils, I like to compare it to like rhythm in music. Where the next two photographs are more movement based, where this first one is definitely showing a starting point in this main figure, and then you follow around all of the different limbs, or possibly this photograph of a landscape where it's time lapsed and you see the lines of the cars taking you back. Depending on what you are going after in a photograph, it can make for a really nice simplistic whole feeling, or it can add some variety in as well, depending on what you are going after. Which variety adds interest to your artwork and mixes it up, it changes it, it adds a little spice to it, that a lot of the times you have certain things the same, like we have the examples of these little candy pieces, but there's variety in the color. Or the example of the rocks. They're all rocks, but there's variety in the shape to mix it up a little bit for us to view. Or the example down here of the vegetables. They're all vegetables and fruits, but when combined with their different colors and shapes, there's variety, there's interest, there's something different about the photograph and what we're viewing. So the next one we've talked about as well is balance, and this creates a sense of stability in your work, an evenness, a calmness, like everything is as it should be. And you can do this by like perfect symmetrical balance, which is our example down here on the left. If I were to cut this in half, it's perfect on both sides, it's symmetrical. Or you have asymmetrical over here on the right side, which you've seen before, where if we didn't have this, where we have one side that's a little bit heavier but it's evened out as best as you can with other objects back here to create that equalness, that even out, so we don't have that emptiness feeling. Our next one are 2 and 1 again, which repetition and pattern. And this is taking an element and repeating it over and over again in a pattern. We all know what a pattern is. But with repetition, you can have some variety in it. So our example over on the left would be a perfect pattern. It's all the same, boom, boom, boom. Same with in the middle, but as you get towards the right side, you get a little variety worked in where the right side, all the same things, but it's different in color. There's a little bit of variety. And if you want to create like a really nice, consistent photograph, this is what you could use. You can add a little variation, but generally it feels like it's all the same combined as a whole. Which the next element is combining all these separate parts into a whole piece as well, which is unity and harmony, where the example on the left, each individual person, their 2 feet come together, creating that circle in the middle, or this little succulent plant where all the individual pieces of the leaf come together to create this whole entire plant as well, or the water, which I really enjoy because we see all these different light segments, and when you get close it's abstract and it doesn't make sense, but when you're all away it comes together as reflective water. Or here on the right side we have the same little like spices and flowers all together to create this whole big picture, because we don't see those as individual pieces, we see it as a whole. Which if you want to create this feeling of wholeness, all these pieces coming together to create something, you could use unity and harmony. So contrast are opposites that are coming together, and you can add variety, interest into your artwork by having some sort of contrast. So contrasting like lines against shapes, or colors against value, or contrasting colors as well. There's many ways that you can make this contrast, and this is a great way to pop and draw some drama and make sure you know where to look at, because in each of these photographs it's very evident, like I'm supposed to be looking at the purple balloon, or right where these diagonal lines meet this black and white top, or the colored fish against the gray ones, or the contrasting colors, I look right where they meet. It really brings you to a certain point in a photograph. Which the next one is playing. You can either play with proportion or size, so it can create like a surrealist feeling that it, like what in the world is going on? Like on the left, like how is this hand grabbing this air balloon? And really make you realizing the differences in objects as well. Like the example of the 2 balls right here of the little tiny one compared to the big one. It's like, wow, those are very, very different, make you appreciative of it. Or of the 2 different shoes sizes, the exact same shoes but 2 different sizes, create a like, whoa, take it back kind of feeling. Or sometimes if you want, oh, these are a wholeness, they come together, having things the same size proportionate to each other, oh, feeling of like everything is okay, where these ones are like, what? Feeling. So we should have taken notes over what each one of these elements and principles of design are and how you can use them in photography. Save it as a PDF and upload it. Enjoy. Have fun on your scavenger hunt.